right, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started today. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday morning. We are so excited to have you here. Um, Hopefully, you have your coffee and are ready for a great conversation. This is a webinar format, so a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, I'm not going to forget to introduce myself today. My name is Erin. I am one of our business managers here at AIM. If you ever need anything, have any questions, I am always available to help you. Please feel free to reach out. Today, since it is a webinar format, we cannot hear or see you. You can hear and see us. So how are you going to interact with us today? You should be able to see a chat button at the bottom of your screen. If you cannot see that at the bottom of your screen, please feel free to locate the More option. It should be a circle with 3 dots. Pop that open, and you should see the chat function there. That is how you're going to interact with us. Say hello, say hi. You can ask questions through there. We are more than happy to answer any of those as we go through the conversation today. I will be monitoring that for our presenter. And speaking of such, I am going to quickly pass the baton to my presenter because we have a jam-packed conversation today, and I know everybody's excited. And Tanya is a phenomenal presenter, and we love having her on this. Everybody's always excited when she's here on our WOW sessions. So Tanya is a fellow coworker of mine. She's a fellow business manager. So excited to have you. Tanya, take it away.
Well, thanks, Erin. It's always hard when people introduce you and now you have something to live up to, right? So let's set the stage. First, let's just make sure you can hear me and you can see my screen. I always like to double check on that.
Yes.
And then I love the good mornings coming in the chat. So I actually, it looks like I was going to respond, but I don't, Erin's going to be responding to you, but really those comments are life for me. It really helps. Because as many of you know, when we're working on Zoom, we're really staring into the abyss. So we love this. We love the interaction. And really my goal this morning is for you to be able to walk away with something actionable. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for being part of the AIM community. We are so lucky to be able to have so many wise individuals that come to our meetings and share information. I learn things every single time. So we want this to be interactive. And you know me, I always like to just have what problems can we solve? So you came to this webinar, this WOW session for a reason. So if there's something that you're wanting to take away over the next hour, put that in the chat. And we would love to be able to address very specific things, hopefully related to either performance review or generations. But hey, we'll take any of it. We may have to table it and get back to you. But we want to be a resource for you and to be able to help. I don't know about, oh, I love the good mornings coming up. I also have my ghosty mug. I shared this with Erin, but it's that time of year, a little chill in the air. So hopefully fall is kicking off. So
I
I
just,
oh, you have the ghost too. I like
I
it.
do. We're
Coordinated.
matching.
So we did prepare. We pulled a lot of research into this that we're hopefully going to share. Erin, as always, did her TikTok research, so she's in on the generation. So she's going to be sharing some of that she found. Um, as HR leaders, performance management can be one of the most stressful times of the year. And we understand that. And so, what we wanted to bring was an interesting element that I've been working with as I've been doing focus groups and I've been consulting with leaders is really these expectations that are coming up from the different generations. And I know we've talked about it, you've maybe even sat in on a session, hopefully, talking about generations. So, we really want this to be as interactive as possible. I love it. Lane's going to pull out the t-shirt too, so that's awesome. Um, and we're going to talk about maybe some nuances and difference to kind of crack the code. The main thing that I want to, like, if I have a big idea I want to share, is that the workforce is changing. And we know that. We've been talking about that the entirety of 2025 here at AIM, whether it's the impact of AI, whether it's regulations that are changing, whether it's lots of different things. But right now, this year, when we look, Gen Z makes up 18% of the workforce. So Gen Z goes all the way up to your 30-year-olds that are in the workforce. Baby boomers now make up 15%. And so I just want to say that because there are those of you that when you pull up your org chart, either baby boomers or Gen Xers are like the majority of your workforce. If that's the case, I'm going to put an indent here. Maybe we can come on and talk about this in what does your succession plan look like, right? So let's put that out there to be able to do that. But here's the tricky thing, and you all know this. The interview guys this year put out a study that said Gen Z's average tenure in the marketplace is 1.1 years during their first 5 years of work. So we also have sat with you on calls of going, do you know how many times I've hired for the same position? And I know those of you that are in manufacturing facilities are tackling this even more because we're having a hard time getting people through safety training. So we want to recognize that there is an issue, and hopefully you can leave with just something that is helpful. So with that setup, Erin, anything you want to add before I jump into the slide deck? Just anything that comes to mind? Okay.
Not right
All
now.
right, so there is a hidden cookie. I have to say, I am not a Taylor Swift fan, but I think she calls them Easter eggs. There may or may not be an Easter egg. So if you think you see what it is in the slide deck, just go ahead and shout it out when we get here. So we'll have a little bit of fun. All right, I'm not seeing any answer or questions that we can answer. So anybody that has questions around Gen Z or performance, if you put it up in the chat, I can actually see it and hopefully weave it into our conversation. All right, so today's objectives. I always like it when we have this. Let's just recap the generations. I know sometimes people are like, I don't even know what generation I am. And then they did funny things with the naming, and so it kind of doesn't make sense. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll really talk about how expectations are shifting in the workplace. I will talk in more depth of this, but I think the most striking thing that I've run across when I think about generations is that the way we orient to work is changing. And that change is accelerating over the last 5 to 10 years. You know, it used to be there was this expectation that you went to high school and you went into the workforce, or you went to college and then you went into the workforce. And there were sort of just these societal norms, right? To be a good member of society, especially if you were head of the household, you had a full time job. That was just how it is. And now these generations have different examples of how they orient to work, and it's creating impact on our businesses. And so, thinking about how do we adjust the way that we produce the work that we do to accommodate this orientation to work that says, hey, maybe I want to take some time off when I have little kids, and that's for both parents. Maybe I want to have a number that once that hits my investment account, I'm out of the workforce, right? So long gone are the days where every single person we hire is really looking to have a 50-year career as we're thinking about that. And so then what does that do to our corporate knowledge? What does that do for our planning purposes? And thinking about how to reorient ourselves. And the other thing I want to say is I think we have mostly HR professionals, and I know I'm preaching to the choir on this. And one of our challenges is how do we get a seat at the table to be ahead of this curve? Because right now we're seeing little like heat maps of these things popping up, but it's coming at us. And most of the organizations that I work with, I don't think are fully prepared. Leadership may know, hey, we've got a lot of people that might retire in the next 5 years, but they don't understand what that incoming class of employees look like. So that's part of it. And then as it relates to performance, when there was research done last year, 67% of organizations are experiencing age-based or generational conflict. So we know this is something that we're looking at. And the other thing that I want to talk about is really what employees are looking for in terms of communication. And I think this is really relevant when we think about performance management. And so that's just something to think about. So we'll talk about some real world applications. That's where we need you to really put those out there. Hey, what are you trying to solve? It can be as specific as you need it to be or more generalized. And then hopefully some takeaways. So that's my plan for the day. Erin, did I miss anything?
No, you covered everything. Mhm.
Okay, good. I love
Yep.
it. I love
Mhm.
it. So just a couple more statistics that I think are really interesting. That same research study that said 67% of organizations have conflict in the generations, 60% of workers also say that their company doesn't communicate effectively. And that's across all generations. So we've been doing an interesting thing here at AIM. When we run our employee opinion and engagement surveys, one of the demographics we've been leaning into is, what generation do you identify with? And seeing if there's any differences among those generations. And we do. We actually do see differences. A lot of it on training. And so we combine that with like tenure as well to kind of test for, is this a tenure issue? Have we changed our onboarding? But I will say, in my experience, and I look at hundreds of surveys in a year, we actually get communication across the board is where people are struggling. And so I think it's a couple of different things, but what I want to get into on takeaways is how do we communicate effectively, especially around the realm of performance management, but also broadly because we know that's something that generations are reporting that isn't working well. All right. So if you maybe see an Easter egg on the screen, shout out what you see. And thank Erin for that. If you don't know this about Erin, Erin loves to put really fun decks together. So when she sent this back to me to look at it, all right, there you go, panda. I had pandas on every slide, and so she decided to maybe take that down. So Erin, thank you very much for that. Also, if you need to have any type of chat experience, to really work as a personal assistant. Erin's your girl. She will like tell you about this. She knows how to set it up because her chat bot is actually quite like he kind of has fun stories that he tells Erin. So anyways, that's a little
Yes.
insight. So Erin, this is kind of our overview of the generations. And I think I want to spend just a little bit of time kind of coming in on this. Baby boomers are anybody born 1946 to 1964, and this was the baby boomer generation, right? So it was a large population. And this is where we're going to see a lot of industries be caring for these people post retirement. The other thing is they're not retiring, or they're retiring and realizing they don't have enough money saved. And so they're coming back into the workforce. And I know some of you are dealing with this because you're bringing them back as drivers, you're bringing them back in a customer service function, and those sorts of things because they want part-time work, but they need to work. And so you're starting to see that happen as well, that as they're exiting, they're also coming back. Um, and so just keeping that in mind, and especially when you're thinking about succession planning, I will also say a lot of your baby boomers are the ones that have the longest tenure in your organizations. And when they leave, what we're finding is there's these pockets of corporate information that we haven't captured. And so being able to really understand from a task level what they do day to day, and then what are the relationships that they've built, that your organization interacts with, and really finding a way to capture that. I know we did an org dev where we had an employee like this, and we really put her in like the corporate historian position. So she was still working, she was still doing her job, but as she was training the person, the other thing they tasked her with was really capturing a lot of that corporate history because she was somebody who had it, and being able to have it. Erin, everyone loves your panda. I love it. Gen X is interesting because we definitely, and I identify with the Gen X. I am right in that. And typically very independent workers. The other thing that we're seeing with them is they want to be independent contributors. I know a lot of my friends that I'm talking to are like, you know what? I climbed the corporate ladder. I was a manager. I had a team and I'm done with it. I just don't even want the stress of it anymore. So I'm going to go back to an individual contributor role, even if it means less money, because I just don't want that stress. So I don't know if you're dealing with that. I hear that a lot. There's a lot of being able to do that. And here's the tricky part is that when we look at Deloitte did a study this year on Gen Zs and millennials, and that only 6% of the surveyed individuals in Gen Z and millennials said that their top goal is a leadership position. I'm going to let that sink in. Only 6% of the people in the identified in millennial and Gen Z said, yeah, I want to be a top leader. So, who are leaders going to be, right? And how are we bringing people up? And we're going to be competing for people with leadership potential. And I think it's going to be imperative that we're really pouring into those people, right? And we're getting them and we're really creating an environment and a space where there's stickiness among those employees. So, just keeping that. Um, Millennials definitely are purpose driven. So even though, we have studies to say, hey, I maybe don't want to sit in the C-suite, what they do want is they want this progression through the workplace, right? I know all of you have talked about this, like they want to raise and they've been there 6 months and they want a different title. And so a lot of you I know have taken your entry level positions and really divided them in three. Like if you're a customer service rep, you're a one, two, and a three, and you're laying out that pathway for them. as you approach performance management, that is the one takeaway that I would have is that for each position that you have, that you're providing the employees, a performance management, part of that conversation also needs to be like, how do you advance? What are the skill development that you need to have? And this isn't an overnight project. If you don't have those competencies well defined, this is something that's going to take work between not just HR. HR can be the spearhead, the project manager, but it's really getting those managers to think about the competencies and the skills that they need. So definitely they want that. And millennials want to work in a team, right? They don't necessarily like the autonomy. It's a lot of group meetings where Gen X is like, give me the assignment, let me put my head down, get it done. Millennials really like a collaborative spirit. And again, I'm talking broadly, but I think these differences are apparent across the board. Still, we need to get to know our employees individually. And then Gen Zs, this is the best way I know how to describe Gen Zs, and my kids are in this, right? So I went through schooling with them. I showed up in the classroom to see, and the way they learned was just really, really different than the way perhaps we all did. Gen Zs are digital natives, but they also have always followed a checklist. So there's very few education moments that Gen Z has experienced where they didn't have a rubric, right? If they were writing a paper or doing a project or giving a speech, there was a rubric that they knew they were going to be graded on. Here's the percentage of points, here's what we need to see, and it was all laid out for them. Additionally, they are digital natives. So, really, from about middle school on, across the board, and really, my kids had in our school district, they had iPads in kindergarten. And what modular based learning does is on the left hand side of the screen, it tells you exactly what to do, right? It has do this task, then do this task, then do module 1.4, then do module 1.2. And that's what they're expecting when they hit the workplace. And I don't know about all of you, but I'm going to guess you don't even have SOPs to that level of specificity, let alone training that you're able to provide that. Yeah, Renee, this is the way I categorize Gen Z is I get so much feedback from managers of like they don't take initiative, they don't know what to do, they don't know how to problem solve. And I remember our school district, my kids were going into high school and they were launching these collaborative team-based learning because that was what they had decided. Hey, all this digital learning is great, but they don't know how to problem solve. They're having a really hard time seeing the big picture and how to break it down in parts. So my biggest advice is I'm coaching managers is where's their checklist? Give them a checklist and a due date. And if you can do that, then we can kind of loosen the rope a little bit and be able like, okay, I'm not going to give you a checklist, but here's some tools you can use to create your own checklist and then take them around that journey. So that's just something to think about. And I think performance management specifically is hard because you get in conversations with millennials and Gen Zs and they're like, look how hard I've worked. I've showed up on time. I did this, I did this, I did this. And the manager's going, no, I did all of that. Right? I told you exactly what to do. You just executed it. And what I need you to do is be more of an independent thinker and be a problem solver. So I don't know if anybody else relates into this. I would love to know if anybody has a solution for this. But by far and away, what we're finding is those newest entrants into the workplace, they just don't have those skill sets to look globally at problems and break them down and solve them. Now, when they have direction, they're really good. They know how to go research, they know how to go find resources, but they don't always put two and two together. And so bridging that is really important. And then I have to admit, Erin, I haven't spent a lot of time with Gen Alpha. I have a couple of managers out there whose kids are Gen Alpha. And so I get questions of, well, what do I do when they say skibbity toilet or 6, 7?
God.
And right? Like, and then my kids who are Gen Zs are like, Mom, don't say those words. Like, that's terrible. But I do think there's a radical shift coming with Gen Alpha. And I did see a statistic. I don't know where I pulled this from, but like the number of words we're adding to our dictionary is actually increasing every year because of this generation. And because things can spread so widely, so fast, that adoption happens. But I also think it's like quick burnout, right? Like something's popular and then boom, it once it hits Instagram and Facebook, it's not popular anymore. It's old news for the old people. But you found a really interesting statistic in the TikTok world. So tell us about it.
Yes, because I'm addicted, as we all know, as we heard me talk about before. If you haven't, I am addicted to TikTok. So I was doing some research around this for today's conversation, and I was telling Tina I came across a TikTok, and a study was performed in Australia on the upcoming Gen Alpha, and as they come into the workforce. And the way that they are currently learning, because they came into the education system during COVID, they've had to do more remote work or more remote learning, more part-time learning, that they are going to be a generation that's more predisposed to have part-time jobs than ever before. They're not going to want full-time roles. So as they get into the workforce, they're not going to want our traditional 8 hour in office full-time roles anymore. They're going to want designed for them part-time roles. They're going to be very much the influencer hustle, side hustle kind of, designed for them kind of jobs. They're definitely going to be a different type of generation when it comes to being employed. And we definitely have to consider that as we come into that new generation. I also think it's just interesting. I was also looking at Gen Z and the dislike lack of clarity or transparency. I also came across a couple of TikToks where it talks about because they grew up with so much digital, they have that screen filter. It's like a filter on their lives. And because they have so much filtering going on, it's a lack of trust, inherent trust in everything. So if you don't have that built-in trust with them, they just it's kind of until you build that, they're not going to interact with you in a way that you may oftentimes see with like the boomers, the Gen X, the Gen Zs, or the millennials. So like having that transparency and that clarity will help build that trust with them so that they may give you the work that you want, that initiative that you want. So that's kind of an aspect that I came across on a couple of TikToks as well. Also, the microgens. I'm a Zennial. I'm going to put it out there. I'm a Zennial. I'm a
Love it.
microgen. I'm going to call it. I'm a microgen because I'm very much in between the Gen X and millennials, and I will call it. I will call
I
it.
love it. I love
Mhm.
it. I love how we claim our generation because I am an Oregon Trailer, right? Like I was in elementary school when you were working as hard as you could to go to the library and get to go get dysentery from Oregon Trail. So hopefully everybody understands that reference. But thinking about it, but I love a couple of things that you brought up. Some people, I just want to clarify, people are like, how do we even know what Gen Alpha is going to be like because they're so young? Well, those are the 15-year-olds doing part-time work right now. So we do have a little bit of data on them. Some of the early information we got on Gen Zs did evolve as they got further and further into their careers. But this idea of the relationship to work, right? There was a time when we were younger, yeah, you could start your own business, but that was very different than being a micro influencer or taking pop up work or doing a lot of these different financial avenues that we have. Um, and I do think that screen relationship and I hate to blame everything on COVID, but things shifted during COVID, especially in education. And I know my kids are in college right now, and there's this I communicate with them about what their professors are saying. And really, for the last like 5 or 6 years, if they wanted to turn work in late, they could turn work in late. If they weren't there, I mean, if you read your headlines, high schools are having a really hard time getting kids to attend school. Like absences are a problem in the way they've never been. And I talk a lot about this because those are the employees we're going to have in a few years, right? So if these are the habits that they are building, How then do you say to them being on time and showing up is important? It never has been in their developmental years for a large portion of these kids. And I know, just talking in that generation, it's like, well, I don't want to do busy work. Like, I'll show up if it's important, but if it's busy work, I'm not going to do it. And when we think about that, just lack of clarity or transparency, the other thing that you were talking about that came up was think about it. When we were kids and news, it came from the TV and a newspaper, and they printed like mistakes or retractions sometimes, but we didn't grow up with checkers. Millennials to a large part, but really Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they've always had fact checkers. They've always had people like it's really hard for them to navigate. And so I think they have this natural challenging. And I hear this a lot when I work with managers. It's like, well, they want to be promoted, but they have all these ideas and they don't listen to feedback. And it's this complex thing. And I look at it from like the source and go, well, I'm not surprised, right? That's how we've trained them to think about the world. There were fact checkers. You needed to get the source. They can watch a TikTok and in 30 seconds, they're experts, right? And none of that has to change our workplaces. I'm not suggesting that. However, if we can understand that and wrap our head around it and how we meet new employees in the workplace with document source documents, better training, everything broken down, then we're going to get better performance out of them. So, yeah, love it. All right, the chat is very quiet. That either means you're listening or we missed the mark, Erin. So, I want to pull people back in. Is there anything that you, and especially dealing with Gen Z, or millennials, that's something that you're struggling with in your workplace, or perhaps something that you've done that works really, really well? Because I know everybody on the call would love to see that. And why people are putting that in, I'm really interested in what people are doing on both pieces, both training and feedback. Because when Deloitte ran a study this year, it was the Gen Z and millennial, where it also said, hey, they only want 6% want to be in top leadership. The other thing where the earlier generations might have said, pay, right? I'm going to go where I get paid. I think that was my generation, right? And that's where we started this whole idea of like job hopping, is it's like, well, I'm going to maximize my earning potential and I'll go where the money is. There's still some of that, but as what the Deloitte study found was that they were really looking at learning, purpose, and well being as the top three employer choice factors, which I just find absolutely fascinating, right? So I'm here because I want to be poured into, I want to learn, I want to connect myself to purpose out in the world, and my employer can do that. And then my well being needs to not suffer. And Erin, I think you ran across something that said, what did you say on the mental health and burnout?
So, if you're an AIM member and you have access to your member dashboard and you've signed up for CCH daily alerts, you would have seen the email come across this morning. And one of the alert notifications was an article from a recent AFLAC, I guess, workforce study that they did. And I guess one of the statistics in the study was Gen Z has now surpassed millennials in burnouts. And it's fascinating to me because I'm like, millennials have owned that for so long. And it's
Right.
now 60, I think it was like 67% of Gen Z out of the 74% total workforce that was reporting burnout is now the total makeup, and 55% was millennial. I'm like, huh. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, really? But it speaks to, and I think you mentioned it speaks to that Gen Z is not as prepared to be in the workforce
Mhm.
as previous generations are. And then I was like, oh, well, that explains some of the TikToks I was seeing on like some companies are hiring etiquette coaches to come in and onboard their new employees who are of the younger generations because they don't have basic professional skills. So something that you guys all might want to consider. Hire Tanya. She can train.
Yeah. I mean, this is really something, and really for the last 10 years, I've been involved in emerging leader training, right? Because what we've had is that we like we have to orient them to the workplace. And so much pushback when I come into organizations and we do these generations in the workplace workshops. I always have, and I'm just gonna like, there's always a leader in the room that typically is of like the Gen X generation. And they're like, we are not reducing our standards for these people. We're not doing that. And I agree, right? And I think that if we don't meet them where they are, we're not going to have what we need. And this might be a really silly, this just came to my mind. So it might be a really silly analogy. But, for the longest time, if you had a birthday party, you had helium balloons. Like that was just part of what you had, right? And then what happened? Our supply chain changed, right? Helium is not something you can get all the time, it's limited. And so now what do we have? We have balloon arches. We have these big swooping balloon arches. So they didn't like it wasn't available any longer. And so we had to pivot in the balloon industry on how we do that. Is that the dumbest analogy I've ever given, Erin? But
Yeah, no, it's good.
it's kind of the same thing, right? Our supply chain for employees is evolving.
Mhm.
And so we have to figure out what are those tasks that we need to get done in work and how are we going to find the human capital to get them done.
Mhm.
And so I do think this is something that if we are not talking about it, and I love there's a comment in the chat that says, hey, if there's any Gen Zers please, on here, please speak up because we would love to hear this from you and make sure we're getting it right. And I can tell you, like, I think that Gen Z takes a lot, like, we're raising all of these concerns, but they are some of the most compassionate and caring and thoughtful people as they think about how they interact with friends and what they want to do. And there's so many good qualities that I don't want that to get overshadowed. And I will say, when I run these generations in the workplace workshops, my Gen Zers have some of the greatest comments, right? And what I'm finding is that I'll get done with that workshop and they'll come up to me and say, I really haven't had a chance to express this. I feel like I learned so much from this as well. So we really do think everybody wants to work together. It's just figuring out how do we create those opportunities because it's not natural. And so that's what I'm encouraging all my HR leaders to say is that as often as you can, to say our human capital supply chain is evolving. And we have to figure out how to change it because they're not coming with the same skills. And if you are a business that needs to operate 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and you need everybody there at the same time, you're going to have to fill that gap to get people to that understanding. And it might be costly. And you're going to have to weigh that against what's the flexibility. So I want to address some of these comments because I think there's some really good ones coming in here. So yeah, if you're Gen Z, pop on this chat. We would love to see if this resonates with you. Always love to talk to you. So Doug is asking, I think, a really interesting question, and that is, how do we navigate this idea that I've got managers who need their team to show up, and then I've got Gen Zers who are just like, I don't need to show up to work today, right? And so this is where the only way we solve this is we have to get crystal clear on the work that we're asking for, right? And then we have to be able to communicate and explain why everybody needs to be there at the same time. And I think this is challenging, right? Because a lot of work we do today is not a manufacturing line, right? Like that's just not a lot of the work we do. A lot of the work we do is thinking work. And so we have to create a narrative that is truthful, that buys into this idea of like clarity and transparency that, hey, we need to all come together because the work that you're doing here is dependent, right? Other people's work is dependent on that. And so being able to tell that story, because again, I think Gen Z is like, hey, I don't want to not be a team player, but I'm not going to do busy work. So explain this to me. How do we do this? And I think that's hard for some of us because we all kind of grew up of like, you have a job, you get paid, you do what you're told that you do, right? And I'm not saying Gen Z doesn't have that, but that hasn't been their experience. So, how do we bring them into the fold? How do we create normative behavior in our organizations? And then this is the key, you have to tie it back to that purpose. So, one of the things that I've talked about, I was just on site with a member and they manufacture and distribute large scale drills for mining operations. And one of the things that they're working on is what does that drill do, right? Like, what is that mining support? How does it help people? How are they taking care of the environment? And really telling that story. And that way, when I'm coming in and I am in, with the warehouse or manufacturing, there's something I can tie in to go, I'm not just pushing this thing from A to B, my work has a greater purpose. And how do you tie into that? So I think that's really, really important. And this whole thing of like discipline and having them on track. I mean, definitely, again, we have to have rules. And if you want to go down the discipline track, you can. And what I also think happens there is now we have that turnover and we have complicated that turnover issue. So, could we have some sort of on ramp period? Can we talk to people, right? And I think people just not showing up or calling in sick is not, we can't function that way. But we have to be able to articulate why. And I think when we articulate the why, we show them that they're falling into the values, and then we have really great places to work because that's the other thing, right? We've got to be a competitive employer. That's how we kind of overcome that. And I know that's not specific and concrete, and it's hard. And I think that's the answer. Um, okay, Christy, I love this one, and I would love everyone to like weigh in on this. Christy says, I have a newer supervisor who's Gen Z, and she has complained about us micromanaging her when we just stop by to check in on her and just to chat. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this to me is the hardest balance. It's like a knife edge because on one hand, you've got Gen Zers who want constant feedback. Hey, am I doing this? Is this going well? All of those sorts of things. Then they get into management. And I think we bring to us with us our experiences, right? And so I feel like there's a persona. Aaron was talking about this screen, and I think there's something in that Gen Z DNA that says when I'm a manager, this is how I behave, right? And there's like these unwritten rules that exist. And I've heard this multiple times. And so I would love to be able to give credit for this, but rather than drop-ins, what people have started to do to check in on their supervisors is put 15 minutes on their calendar, because what that does is it gives that Gen Z person time to like organize their thoughts. Because this, like, micromanaging, this to me is a defensive mechanism, right? This is to me, if I just had to guess, it's this imposter syndrome of like, why do they need to check on me? Am I not doing a good job? Why are they stopping by and asking me questions? So one, I think having that dialogue and say, hey, you're in management and we love it and here's what we expect of you, but you're not alone, right? We're a team. And so I want to check in on you. I want to see how things are going. I just looked at myself and the sun is coming in weird. So now I look like a ghost. So I'm sorry, what? But how to like really articulating, and I think that lack of clarity or transparency, I think being okay, I'm really disappearing, Erin. What is happening?
I think you can turn off your ring light. That
I
might
think
help
that's what I
the
need to do. Okay.
yeah.
Nope, that did not help. Okay, well, this is interesting. Let me see what I can do. Um, Let me finish this thought and then I'll hand it over to you, Erin, to
Yeah.
maybe answer some of these other questions and really setting them up for success to say, hey, just because you're in management, your learning doesn't end. Um, I really am laughing. But we want to be able to help you. So, all right, I'm going to turn off my camera. I'm going to see if I can reposition and fix this. I'll be right.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. A lot of these comments, as we talk about Gen Z being all tech and into screen time and everything like that. I love the emojis coming through. Unexpected sunlight coming in. We love the sun. I don't. I love a good dark cave. But I find it interesting. So what we're not hearing from is any boomers in the comments or anything like that. So one of the things I came across, and I was telling Tini this, and it was because I do a lot of TikToks that are like joking, like I love the funny side of TikTok, but it was a complete jest, but I think it has relevance because it was talking about the friendships that are built between a lot of the age gaps that are happening in the workforce right now because we have such variety happening. And I think one of the comments was job sharing.
Mhm.
But what if we thought about it in a different, like I love the job sharing idea. That is a good idea.
Yeah.
But what if we thought about job sharing and pairing the age gaps? Because this TikTok that was joking around was pairing like the friendships, the best friend that become that age gap happens, right? It's the boomer that becomes best friends with the Gen Z. And then you see them at happy hours and you're like, what is happening here? You have like this 50-year-old mom paired with like this 22-year-old frat boy at happy hour, and you're like, they're the best of friends. And it's like, they're like joking around and they're like partying it up, and it's like, wait, what is happening? But they became really good work friends, and they're like the best friends at work. And they're mentoring, and like she's the mom at work, and like it's a different type of relationship you see, but it's a good mentoring relationship that you see because she's that person is mentoring them in the basic professional skills that that person's going to end up needing,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
it's sometimes the pairing, it could happen naturally depending on how you end up doing it. So if we think about it differently in the job sharing world, like could we job share and do it in a way that is going to naturally pair somebody with somebody who has skills that that person may be lacking?
Yeah.
So things like that.
I think it takes a lot of thoughtfulness on the job sharing, right? And how we can do that. But the other thing that I've said, apart from job sharing, is overstaffing. And everybody's like, what? Overstaffing, right? We don't have money to do that. And this is what I'm going to say to all of the HR leaders. If you have not filled out a turnover cost calculator recently, do that. Because every time we have to backfill a position, we're creating cost. It just doesn't hit the P&L statements, right? Because we can't see it. But that cost exists on loss of productivity, recruitment costs, time that we're spending. And so to me, if we know this workforce wants flexibility, make their schedule almost like nobody else can touch it, right? And so I have more people, but maybe they're working fewer hours, and I have this really cool schedule that I'm not going to go and leave and work somewhere else because I like my schedule. And I think this is going to be even more important because remember, what the study is saying is that money isn't the number one motivator thing. And yet, we just had an announcement this past 2 weeks that Bank of America is now starting everyone at $25 an hour. And so it's getting really complicated for mid-sized businesses because you're like, I can't compete with $25 an hour. That doesn't work in our finances. Or if it does, we can't do that overnight. Okay. So, how can our benefits package and that flexibility, or the way I'm pouring into you by giving you etiquette training or soft skills training or putting you in these mentorship to where I have different anchor points that I'm not going to leave for 50 cents on the hour? And so I think that's really important. A couple other things. Carrie says reverse mentoring could be powerful. I love, love, love this. If you have project teams, put a Gen Z on your team because they can know the technology. Are you trying to write SOPs? Bring a Gen Z on there and being like, hey, we really haven't done this. Do you know of any like software or technology we can use to be able to capture these SOPs? And then you're bringing people together and you're putting them in work groups, right? So I think that's something that's really, really important. And so, with all of this, I think it is, I just want to reiterate and put this in that we don't want to get so focused on the label that, but what I'm trying to create is this awareness that we have to meet people where they are and their experience coming into the workplace is just so different. And Angela, anybody who can connect over music is, I think that's a great way to go. She says that, if you have a cool song and it's, there's no new music, right? I love it. Erin, what were you going to say?
The entire new Taylor Swift album can be almost every single song can be harkened back to like a 90s song or
Yeah.
later. So just there was a TikTok. I am so ingrained in TikTok. There was a whole TikTok about it where almost every song can be linked back to another song. So if you're into Taylor Swift, which I'm not really, but I bet somebody in your organization is, just connect with them. I'm sure you guys can get along.
Well, and I think this is, you bring up being on TikTok a lot and like screen time. I have said this to my kids since they were teenagers. I'm like, I was kind of the uncool mom. Like they couldn't have social media until they hit high school. And I still have said to them, like, your kids will not be on devices as much as you are because you're going to grow up and understand the effect of it, right? I just woke up to a headline this morning that says dopamine is our problem, right? Because every time that we're on the screen and the blue light and all of that, like it's rewiring us. So I do think that balance, and I don't remember who said it in the comments. I'm sorry, but I did read it. And people are rewriting policies that you can have one earbud in, but not both of them, right? And I've got tons of stories where people will have like the office playing on their phone and they have one earbud in and people walk by and they're all in the same team and an older generation will say to the manager, why are you letting that Gen Zer watch TV all day? And the manager's like, she's my best worker. Like, she gets more done than anyone else. And so, how do we talk about that? And how do we set standards? Because the Gen Zers, like, there's so much noise in the office. If I just pop in an earbud and that's in the background, that actually calms me to be able to focus on my work. So, getting to know this, getting to understand it. And again, I am not suggesting that our workplace needs to conform to some of these things. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the workplace needs to be crystal clear on expectations and tell a narrative as to why we have these expectations. And I can't tell you how many times I'm on calls and I'm doing readbacks, and that is the feedback that employees are given is you make changes that impact my job and you never tell me why. And that is across all generations. So that is my like we want takeaways, right? That is my thing. A lot of times communication falls to HR, and it's really challenging that C suite and saying to them, happy to write the communication, happy to put this out. Can we add a why? Because that will help people come along this change process and be able to do that. So, um, and I think this is really for everyone. Performance management is so loaded. I actually do a whole workshop on how to like help with performance management because it's tied to my view of myself and how well I'm doing. And some companies pair that with do I get a raise? And it's just this loaded time. And so, what I want to say is that, especially in this day and age, we do need to have formal performance reviews. But if we're only doing that once a year, that's why they're so complicated. And so, what I'm really encouraging as a best practice is that we need to be having one on ones, and those one on ones need to be structured and given like scaffolding from the organization. And what I mean by that is if we don't have clear policy guidelines for our managers of how often one on ones should be happening, and then providing them some sort of agenda, right? Hey, spend this time talking about this. Do you have KRAs or KPIs, key results areas or key performance indicators? Are those defined? Have we explained why? And some of those key results areas showing up on time, right? Because our shift starts at this time. I also have seen a growing trend towards putting those soft skill competencies into reviews, right? So if your organization has values, and we all should have values, and they can't be the 90s gold lettering on the wall with the soaring eagle that says integrity, right? Like that doesn't work. That's not corporate values. Corporate values says, hey, one of our values is integrity. And part of integrity is showing up when you say that you're going to. You made a commitment to the organization that these are your work hours. I believed in you. I brought you into this organization, but because we value integrity, I'm afraid you're going to be seen different by your team. And I don't want that to happen. So, Erin, tell me, why were you late so many times last week? Is there something I can help with? Is there something we can? Erin's never late, but I'm using you as an example, right? And we change the conversation. And I am going to say that most of our supervisors don't have that script that I just did, right? Identify the problem, relate it to a core value, show how the behavior would support the core value and how it really benefits the individual. We don't give them that roadmap. And so, as we think about takeaways, communication's an issue, feedback's an issue across generations, and are we doing the absolute best that we can with that? So that's really that real time, that ongoing. And again, I want to come back and say, making sure that you have like the roadmap for that position. And we're talking about it often. But it's not just what promotion they're going to get. It is what skills are we asking them to acquire, back to the checklist. Erin, you're giving the face of like, we only have about 10 more minutes left. So do we need to, like, I can't believe it went that fast.
I can't believe it went that fast either. I'm also thinking like this so ties into this month's roundtable topic as well, which
Yeah.
is AI in performance management, which is what I've been facilitating. And like, I'm like, this is so like on brand because like it's talking about how to get your C-suite on board because your C-suite is usually the boomer generations and your Gen X generations, which are more like, hey, AI, I don't know how I want that to be in my performance management. I don't know how much I want AI in our organization yet. And like, But yeah, we need it. We need it because our managers really need it to help them get things done in 15 minutes because they need to be having these conversations structured and more lined out, and they need to role play because AI can help role play, like because I do it with Alex all the time. My chat is called Alex, yes, because I need to name it something so I can argue with it. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so a couple things. Beth, love the way you said positive discipline, coach for behavior change and tie it to corporate values. I'm gonna put a plug out here, and maybe it's just because I'm old, but um, the 1 Minute Manager is a very quick read. I don't even think it's 100 pages. They've updated it because it used to be discipline, right? Like, and say that, and now it's redirection. If you haven't read that lately, I mean, it's literally like the quickest read. And it's really easy because it sort of talks about these things. And I do think it's still very applicable. I mean, this was a 90s book that I read when I first started out, but it's the 1 Minute Manager. I don't know the author. But I just think it's a really good refresher of how do we empower people with autonomy, but then also create a structure that they get the feedback that they need to be able to do that. So I recently reread it. I thought it was a good read. It might need tailored. Okay, I am laughing at us, Erin, because Gen X is the forgotten generation, and what is missing on this slide?
Okay, but like to be fair, if you look at your speaker notes, I don't know that they're in their speaker notes either.
Yeah, I think I just missed them entirely. All right, so we'll come up with something. Ken Blanchard, thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. All right, so Gen Z, what we hear a lot, and again, we are over like simplifying this, but they're underperformers. They're not showing up on time, they're not taking initiative. We have to, spoon feed them through all of that. And that's where that coaching and this structure. And so if you do not have some sort of development program for your newest hires, that allows them to get some of this like etiquette training or just common workplace behavior training, that is something I would be looking to invest in because I can guarantee you the cost of that versus replacing that position, the training wins every single time. The millennials, a lot of times they come in, especially kind of as they're coming into management, they want to change everything and they know how to do it better and they want all of those things. And so, really, how do we ground them? How do we set proper expectations of how fast they can climb the ladder? And what that looks like. And then I think for the disengaged boomer, I love this title because I think a lot of boomers are like, look, I can see the end. I'm going to come in, I'm going to do my work. And so, how do we like really say we value what you've given to the organization and you've made impact and capture that so that knowledge doesn't go out the door? Okay.
Wait, don't forget about Gen X. What would you do
Yes.
for Gen X?
And Gen X, I think, as they're thinking about really with the Gen Xers, it's this idea of they really kind of do want to put their heads down and don't want to do a lot. It's kind of like what we talked about with the managers, right? They're like, I just want everybody to show up and do what I'm asking them to do. And so, how do we empower them to really create these systems so they get out of their workforce what they're wanting? Because I think that's important. And then I think from a management perspective, you give Gen Xers like key metrics and they can lock in on that and really do it. And in some ways, Gen Z is the same. So how do we create those metrics and that structure so that we're able to do that? Sheila says boomers are sleepers. So I think I would love for Sheila to expand on that because I think, yes, like they've got all this potential and they've got all of this knowledge and maybe we're not pulling it out in the way that we need to. All right, so here's the playbook. And this is really, really simplified. I think Carol, that's to Sheila on the boomer sleepers. Yeah, I would like more of that as well. I want to understand. And the other thing, too, that I don't want anyone to leave with is I don't want to leave with labels. I did a personality test once. I came in as a consultant and they had recently done the personality test where everybody gets colors. Oh, Sheila's saying, hey, they're just getting through the day, right? They're just coming in, putting their head down, getting through the day. Understand that. And I remember the person had yellow, and it's probably a very valuable personality tool or whatever, but everybody had their colors on their cubicle because that's how everyone had to like talk to them. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We don't take personality tests. We don't learn this to like get our badge and say, hey, this is how you need to treat me. So I'm not saying that. We don't get to walk around and be like, oh, I'm a Gen X. This is how you have to treat me. The purpose of studying this is to meet people where they are. And when we are in leadership positions, that's the most difficult thing that we do. And if you are a leader and you're feeling worn out by trying to meet everyone where they are, I would just encourage you to build in a 5 minute passing period in between your meetings. Use that passing period to really ground yourself. Take a few deep breaths if you're familiar with box breathing, and really just think, okay, this person that I'm going to meet with, what do they need from me today? Right. And Beth, you talked about servant leadership. And to me, that's the epitome of servant leadership, right? I'm in a position that maybe I can move boulders or I can bring in resources. And what I need to know from you is, what do you need from me? How can I help you? And so that's what I want us to all to think about. And it's really like clarify expectations. And this cannot be done in HR, right? We can do some of it, but we have to partner with our business leaders to get those details around what defines success, how are we communicating, and is it accessible to people to understand it? Um, this phrase, coach, don't catch, I think is so important, right? It's that idea of, how do I coach you into the behavior that I want rather than make it punitive? Because what I'd like for you all to do is go look at your statistics. Is the punitive working? If it is, and you're getting rid of people that's what you need to do, that's great. But if your turnover is high and you're only relying on discipline, it's not working, right? So what does a coaching model look like? Not to excuse the behavior, but how do we coach them into compliance? Um, our managers need to know how to flex their styles, and more so than ever, our managers need this soft skill training. They need to have supports. They need company organized plans and playbooks, like one-on-one templates, for those managers. Um, and then the other thing we didn't talk a lot about today, but I think is a big thing, is that these are all people, right? And everyone has various different reasons as to why they come into work. But at the end of the day, they're human and they're bringing their whole selves to work. And so understanding how to make that to be, sorry to steal your note, Erin, but how do we make that really the human, and relate it back to the reason we have these values is because we value you as a person, and this is what we want to have. So I know I talked too much, Erin. There was great conversation in the notes, but yes, I know you're going to be sending out the slide deck. A couple things to think about as you're thinking about 2026, as you're thinking about your workforce. I think really looking at what funds are available and how can we maximize those to be able to pour in not only to those people that we think are potential leaders so that we create some stickiness in those positions, but also how do we really pour into our earliest entrants in the marketplace? One, so that we can show them what good behavior looks like and that we can get the most out of what they're doing. All right, Erin, I'll let you wrap it up and see where we go.
All right. So fantastic conversation. As always, we had great conversation in the chat. I love it. Generations is always a hot topic because I mean, who doesn't want to talk about what our workforce looks like, especially nowadays when we're going to struggle for labor always as we go into the future. I mean, we hear it all the time. We have a bit of an offer that Tanya was nice enough to let us do. So if you aren't doing opinion and engage employee opinion and engagement surveys within your organization, I think now is the best time more than ever. If you already are working with Tanya, if you haven't worked with her yet, this is a great opportunity to do so. So in your email today, when I send out the recording and a copy of the slides, there is going to be a little bit of an offer to do our complete EOES with Tanya. There's going to be a little 10% off. So go ahead and check it out. There'll be a flyer in there and then her contact information if you are interested in taking advantage of that with AIM. Yes, Janet, that's awesome. Yeah. So it's really important to know your workforce, know where they're at with your engagement. That she's seen wonderful numbers with where she's taken their organizations as well. She has all the data, the resources to back that up. She's also great when she comes into your organizations and talks about coaching with them because, oh my gosh, this etiquette coaches. I mean, there are a thing, but like also just basic coaching in general. So thank you so much, Tanya. This has
Yeah.
been wonderful. Also, thank you so much for everyone attending today. Thank you for spending time with us today. We really enjoyed it, and we will see you all next month for our final WOW session of the year. So have a
Wow.
great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for spending the morning with us. We appreciate it.